Hello and welcome to the latest Royal Blue podcast. I'm your host, Paul Wheelock. Delighted to be joined by two of our regular panellists, Joe Thomas and Gav Buckland. Big week on and off the field, potentially, for Everton this week. Obviously on the field, Luton Town come to Goodison on Saturday for that FA Cup fourth round clash. Off it, if the gossip columns are to be believed, there may be some, if not transfer movement, there's certainly transfer speculation regarding players in Everton's squad at the moment, so we'll talk about that. And obviously, it won't be Everton without talking about some of the off-the-field issues at the moment. And we'll be trying to catch up with Joe, particularly about the latest in the appeal against the 10-point deduction and obviously the new charge from the Premier League over breaching profits and sustainability rules. But let's start with transfers. It'd be nice to be talking about players Everton are potentially going to sign, but there was a big line over the weekend from Fabrizio Romano. I think he's got 19.4 million followers, so got to kind of treat what he tweets as pretty seriously. And we'll start with you, Joe. It was to do with Abdoulaye Doucoure, and that Steven Gerrard, manager of Ettifaq, I believe that's how we pronounce their name, the Saudi Pro League strugglers. They've just lost Jordan Henderson to Ajax, and they're looking potentially, they're saying, to replace him with Abdoulaye Doucoure. Came out of the blue, this one, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, just on your point there are a lot of people with very, very big social media following, so I wouldn't trust a single word that they say.
Fabrizio in a transfer.
Oh no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. Yeah, that's not absolutely not a point made at him. I think the reality is that there are some clubs and some leagues and some organisations that like to kind of dabble within the celebrity of football and football transfer and things like that, and obviously it's felt from the beginning that the Saudi Arabia expansion has tapped into that market to try and drum up its own support and its own kind of razzmatazz and things like that. So I mean, I think there probably is a bit of truth. I think that understanding is obviously Ettifaq. You say strugglers, mid-table are about, I think they're 8th in the league. No danger of relegation. But when you think of some of the players that they've signed, Damari Gray being one of them, they haven't exactly torn up the Saudi Pro League. I think they're about 28 points behind leaders Al Hilal, who are another team that have benefited from the lavish funds that have been sent those clubs' way. Obviously, they have a problem in the fact that Jordan Henderson's gone and they want to replace him. Jordan Henderson, despite clearly things not working out there, was starting in their midfield every game, and now they have a hole to fill. I'm a bit surprised that Doucoure's come up in the sense that, I think that obviously he's a very good player and he's very important to us, and probably we shouldn't be surprised that clubs are interested in him given the impact. I mean, there probably hasn't been very many more effective attacking midfielders in the Premier League in the 12 months since Dyche took over and he came out from the cold after being frozen out by Lampard. I mean, the goals, and not just the amount of goals, but the importance of them. I mean, he's written his name into Everton folklore, hasn't he? His performance against Brighton in the 5-1, and then obviously scoring that goal against Bournemouth in the last day of the season. They are historic moments, albeit for the wrong reasons for Everton Football Club, but they're ones that we will all remember for a very, very, very long time. So, but I'm still a bit surprised to see them linked with him. I think they're casting their net wide. I think they have a big list. I think Doucoure is probably on there. And we'll have to wait and see, really, because it's one of those ones, my understanding from Everton is that they'd be determined to keep him. They'd try and do their best to fight off interest, which, of course, they're going to do because of how important he is. We've seen how keenly he was missed over the festive period, and obviously it's a concern that he's done a hamstring again, and we don't know how long that's going to keep him out for. But Doucoure is probably the most important player to Everton at this present moment of time. I think he's the cog that Dyche's system completely falls apart without. Previously, we would have said Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin is important, but Beto has enough of the same attributes to kind of work as a backup there. There is no backup for Doucoure. Gomez has done all right since he's come back in, but you couldn't put your faith in him for the rest of the season, bearing in mind his injury track records and the lack of games he's consistently played in the Premier League over recent times. So this could be a really interesting one, because we know that the Saudi clubs, if they have the money, if they really want to play it, to probably go to numbers that Everton couldn't turn down, and Everton will have a decision to make. Normally, you probably look at Doucoure, as important he is, 31 years old. Got about 18 months left because obviously he signed another new contract last season. Clubs we know is in financial constraints. You think you'd welcome money for a 31-year-old who did one hamstring early in the month, last month, has done another hamstring this month, and there's a bit of uncertainty over, but they can't afford him. And I think that, bearing in mind that we don't know what is going to come down the line in terms of points deductions, appeals, and potentially further punishment, I think we have to plan on the basis that Everton in a relegation battle this season, anything else is a bonus. And if that's the case, then Doucoure is probably one of those players where you go, it's not his market value that you're looking at, it's the value of Everton staying in the Premier League because he is that influential in this setup. And as a result of that, you think that there'd have to be big numbers for Everton to turn their head, or for the club's current financial situation to be perhaps really, really bad. And we know it's not great, but there is still a little bit of uncertainty as to how bad it is. But I think that if Everton in a scenario where Doucoure goes this window, then I think it would have us all very, very worried, I think, about what the short-term future of the club is as well.
Is that cut and dried for you, Gav? Because obviously Joe set out the situation there, and another club with different financial circumstances may look at it, even though he's obviously clearly still an influential player, a 31-year-old who's got 18 months left on his contract. Another club with different circumstances may look at this, and if they did get a bid, it's all speculation at the moment, may have to consider it given his age and given his contract situation. But is it that cut and dried for Everton? We just cannot afford to lose him this January.
There's an argument to say we can't afford to keep him as well, isn't it? We were talking on last Monday about this impasse over the ownership. Isn't it? It's not helping, isn't it? Really, where we've had 777 or whatever you call them these days, effectively given loans to the club, indicates that the club has got a shortage of cash, and that's been the case for a while. And we were speaking about that last summer, weren't we, when we were talking about our transfer activity last summer, or the lack of it, and therefore, when somebody comes in for Doucoure, I don't think the issue for us is it'd be good to move them on for profit and sustainability reasons. That's obviously a consideration. It's getting the hard cash into the business, isn't it, really? And that's what we need at the moment for lots of reasons that we won't go into, but we know to form Bramley Moore, we've still got quite a big wage bill, and on that basis, that's the business sense for selling them. It makes absolutely no sense to sell him from a footballing perspective, because he's and Joe's saying it's not a question of replacing him, is it, really? Because we've got a small squad, we've got to replace him from somewhere within the team. So it's all right, me very well saying I like Jack Harrison playing number 10. That leaves a vacancy on the right hand side of the attack that we've got to fill. By who? So we're plugging holes at the moment in terms of the first team. So, and he is irreplaceable because of his goal scoring record. I think it's that stat of the last 12 months. His attacking midfield, he's got one of the best returns in the Premier League, hasn't he? The importance of his goals. The team just looks better balanced when he plays. So he has to stay from a footballing perspective. But there's other considerations at the moment. The other thing that this raises, of course, is whose decision would it be to sell? Who's making the decision here about Doucoure? About anything in the January transfer window? Is it the board? Well, who's on the board? It's an interim board. 777 are sniffing round. Obviously, they want to take us over. Do they have input? Is it just a Thelwell and Dice decision, or does somebody else we're not aware of? And that's the other thing here, isn't it? We've got different parts of the business pulling in different directions, from a governance perspective, which doesn't help. It'd just be interesting to see how that plays out. The other thing, they might not want to go, might he, for all that.
Well, I think, probably a couple of points to raise. One, there'd been no formal bid at the weekend. I think that, Al Ettifaq are looking at him as one of many, but there'd been no concrete bid as of, last I spoke was probably Saturday night, so Saturday afternoon. There'd been no concrete bids, and we don't know whether one will materialise. They might move on to other targets. Another thing is, and can say this with confidence, is Doucoure genuinely loves Everton. You know, he spent a lot of his time before Deitch come in, desperate to do whatever it took to get his stay at Everton extended. Now, obviously, there are personal reasons there. He's well remunerated for what he does, and Everton are a big club that you'd obviously want to stay at if you could, particularly given he's the other side of 30. But I remember sitting down with him in Washington DC the Frank Lampard summer, and just kind of being a little bit blown away by just how passionate he spoke about the club and he wanted to stay there. And since then, I've spoken to him again, and in happier times, as he's had 2 contract extensions last season, and he was absolutely over the moon. I remember speaking to him after the Brighton game, after the 5-1. I spoke to him at the Amex in the aftermath of that game, and again, there's still a bit of uncertainty over his contract, and I think that one of the many reasons he was so pleased with his performance was it took him to a point where I thought extending his contract became a necessity, really, from an Everton point of view. We'd done so much for the club, so I think there is goodwill there from Doucoure towards the club, and I genuinely don't think there were empty words. And previously, I think at the time of the second contract, and he's told me this, that he likes the idea of finishing his career in England. Now, obviously, those things could be tested. The decision might be taken out of his hands, and with his rejuvenation of his career compared to where it was this time 12 months ago, certainly, he might have become more ambitious. And there are some players who might see Saudi as an ambition. There are lots of others that won't. Those arguments are well rehearsed as to where they stand within the football scheme. But I think that whether or not he wants to would be an active question. It certainly wouldn't be a definite yes from that respect. I think he just does really, really like Everton. I think in terms of, it's a good question about who's making the decisions, and I think that probably the last, we are about 9 days of the transfer window now, will probably, the decision, who has the final say, will be dependent on the finances of the club, I think. And what we're going to see now is, we know that the club is obviously taking money month by month from 777 to fund its operations in the stadium and things like that. We know from what Richard Masters said and the amount of time it's taken, it's clearly, if not complications, the 777 takeover hasn't been straightforward and doesn't look like it is straightforward at this stage. So one of the things that the club is going to have to countenance is how likely is it that the whole thing falls through. And if there is a chance of the whole thing falling through, and obviously these are conversations that you think surely would have taken place, you would hope would be taking place behind closed doors. Would 777 continue to fund it, albeit as a lending partner, as opposed to someone that's coming in? Because whatever the outcome of the takeover, 777 aren't going away. Everton are going to be in a lot of debt to them. Would they help carry on with the expenditure whilst Everton looked for a new alternative? And if the answer to that is no, then these last 9 days are the last opportunity for Everton to bring in money externally to help plug any gaps between now and the summer, so that if there is a fear that there might be a shortfall in how much money they're bringing in, how much is going out, the easiest way to address that is by selling players some money to bring in to help pay those expenses. And that is something that they're going to have to countenance. And I think that that's probably why, look, it's been, Kevin Fowler came out and said at the beginning of the month, albeit for different reasons, it was likely to be quiet. He was talking about incomings. But it has been so far, and it may well be. But I think there is still potential for this to end up being, the reality is, I wrote this morning, transfer market, Everton only have so much control over it. Half of what goes on is affected by the market and what other clubs do. And, Everton do have some very, very good players at very different stages in their career. Whether you look at the emerging talents of Branthwaite and Onana, who are clearly wanted by clubs that compete at the very top levels, whether they can afford them for their own reasons at this stage is I don't know. But obviously, they might sniff around thinking that there's an opportunity for a bargain because Everton might have to do a deal. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have players like Doucoure, who are, again, very, very important to Everton. You look at what he's done over the 12 months against someone like Ettifaq, might think they can have a go when, like Gaz says, from a football perspective, it would be, a kamikaze move to allow Doucoure to go.
Yeah.
But that's whether or not it's that is dependent on football being the part of this that dictates the strategy. And if it's football, then you think Dyche and Farwell say no. If it's finances, then well, it probably comes from above them and says, and it's a big if, but if a big bid comes in, or a big bid in the context of Doucoure and where he is in his career, then it might have to be considered.
Is there a case here? Said we talk about Dyche and Farwell together, don't we?
Yeah.
Is there a case where there's a scenario, not just on Doucoure, on other players, that Farwell says he should go where Dyche says he doesn't?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We you know, when you listen to the podcast and stuff, and you know, you hear the interviews, you know, they work as a team, and I think they work well. But ultimately, Farwell's the director of football, isn't he? Dyche is the manager. On certain things, he might be putting in completely different directions, mightn't he? Delman might want the money for the football business. Dyche might want the money for the football inside of a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon. And that would be an interesting conversation, wouldn't it, really? If we just broke it down to football. I also think, picking up on Joe's point, I know we're going to talk about all the other stuff at the end, but not having heard the result of the appeal in terms of some of our decision making the transfer window is also important, isn't it? I know there's another one there which we need to part, but say if Everton knew now the punishment is not 10 points, it's actually, we've looked at it again, actually, where it's treated harshly, blah, 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 it's 5 points. Yeah. We might look at any footballing decision different because we'll be, 6 or 7 points ahead of the relegation zone then, wherever. That might change. So there's lots of non-footballing things, isn't there, around the club at the moment that are unclear, and if the likelihood is not going to be clear by the end of January, and that's going to, you know, put a lot of grey area around our transfer activity, you know, more so around sales. And I think that's unsatisfactory to a degree. So we can't do anything about the ownership, but, you know, the appeal side of it, you know, if you're going to do two in a season, and we'll talk about this, you know, make sure you the first one's done, where the club can do something about it in the season. And I think this is a case, isn't it, where that's timetable, it doesn't help us. And it'll just be interesting to see how this one plays out from a perspective. Yeah, in other words, I don't want it to go. No, please stay.
Just to finish on that, just in relation to Farwell and Dyche, I'm sure they have disagreements and things like that. But I imagine on something like Doucoure and this issue, they would be aligned, because if there's a scenario in which Doucoure goes, it can only be for financial reasons, which would mean that the money isn't going to get reinvested back into Farwell to be able to do anything with, because I just can't countenance a scenario where anyone at the club from the football operation would think that's a good idea, because it doesn't matter how much money you get for Doucoure, whether you get 5 million or 25 million for him. Matter. Yeah. The reality is, Everton, the club that they're in, the situation they're in, bringing in a replacement that can do the same job, which is quite a unique job within the Dyche setup, they just ain't going to find that this in with a week to go in the transfer window, are they?
Yeah.
So it could be a different conversation if, say, a Newcastle came in for Amadou Onana in the last 10 days. Again, this is maybe me adding 2 and 2 together and getting 5, but there's reports that Bayern Munich are going to come in for Kieran Trippier, and it seems to suggest that I'd quite like to make the move, and why wouldn't you, to go and join up with Harry Kane over there. They've got ready-made replacements in Livramento. They're really struggling in midfield. I think there's talk about Joelinton not signing a new contract. He's got an injury. Is this, again, I'm speculating here, but given what you were both talking about earlier in terms of cash into the business, you're probably looking 50 million plus, I'd imagine, from Amadou Onana. If that was to happen in the next 10 days, very similar to what happened last year with Newcastle and Gordon, do you think that's a different question for the Everton kind of interim board and Dyche and Farwell?
I think that, to an extent, I think the squad is so small and Everton's current position is so precarious that the loss of any one of the 12, 13, maybe 14 players that Dyche has a degree of trust in would be significant and has to be, taken very, very seriously. I think that there's a slight difference between a handful of players like Doucoure and with, say, someone like Onana, and with both Onana and Branthwaite, the amounts of money would be hugely significant. It's the type of thing that could probably fund any shortfall for months on end. Or, if things work out all right, perhaps create the foundation for a reasonable amount of money to be able to spend in the summer. The figures might be so high that they might be able to put some of that back into the football squad. There might be someone they might be able to pay a loan fee or something like that and bring someone in. I think it's interesting with Newcastle because they're one of the teams that seem to be having a go at the profit and sustainability reasons for different reasons to Everton at the minute. It's something that's holding them back. Don't think they really are holding them back. They're ahead of where they expected to be, and they're trying to carry on that rapid trajectory, aren't they? There should be a degree of patience to let everything bed in. I mean, it's interesting that I think Miguel Almiron is being linked to a Saudi Arabian club today, and there are all those question marks over Saudi Arabian ownership and those transfers, and is that going to be a way around it? Are they going to be able to do deals with clubs over there to maybe create a scenario where they have the leeway to then be able to spend big on a player they think will make a difference this season? I mean, that's a question that is an active one. I think with Onana, and I think there's a degree just with Branthwaite, and I know this will be absolutely anathema to many listeners, but as important as they are to the current setup, I think there's probably a little bit more give within the squad to replace them. Dyche plays at midfield 3. He's got 4 options for that. He's got Garner, he's got Onana, he's got Doucoure, and he's got Gay. Arguably, he's got 5 now if Gomez can come in and play a thing. So there's 4, probably you'd say 4.5 players for 3 options there. And I think that you could, as good, and I think Onana is very good, and I think he will be a very, very good player. And I think he is important to this side. I actually think from a playing perspective, and you could see this from that when Everton started that really good run and we're in the middle of it, maybe more so from middle of November into December, and Onana wasn't playing because he was injured. I think that they could probably afford to lose Onana, and they could afford to lose Doucoure. And I think you can make a similar argument with Branthwaite in the sense that, look, I think there's a drop-off to Michael Keane, but I think Dyche has a lot of faith in Michael Keane. He did a good job when he came in against Burnley. Now, look, we know that Michael Keane probably doesn't start in the first-choice centre-back pairing and didn't last season either. And again, I think there's a drop-off because the performance of Tarkowski and Branthwaite has been so high. But again, I think there's a more of a chance of being able to replace him and see less of a drop off with those two than there perhaps is with someone like Doucoure. And when you add in the amount of money that they're likely to attract if somebody was to come into him, even if someone gets a bargain out of Everton, we're still talking tens and tens of millions of pounds. Amadou Onana, it was about 35 million or so the deal that brought him over to Everton, and there are sell-on fees and all sorts that would take a chunk out of what Everton would get. I think the starting point really is going to be 60, 70 million at least. I mean, the starting point, they benchmarked him with the Caicedo deal, which was 115 million. So Everton's starting point is probably going to be 100 million. And, Newcastle's, if they were to come in, will probably be somewhere like 50, and they'll end up somewhere in between. And where they are and where that compromise lies will depend on probably how desperately Everton need the money. But I think there is a potential for something like that. Now, it's been a very, very quiet window so far. There are clearly a lot of British clubs that are worried, English clubs that are worried about profit and sustainability, Arsenal being one of them, which is why they haven't moved for Onana yet. And it may well be that type of deal is just too much for anyone to do in January. So there'd still be a little bit of... I'm not surprised that there's interest, and I wouldn't be surprised if... I think there'll be a lot of speculation around some of these players over the next 10 days. But I think that a lot, any club would have to do a lot of work to get either of those deals over the line, especially given the fact of how important they are to Everton. But I think if there is going to be any intrigue in the window, those are that's the context in which would unfold. The other most likely I think, flashpoint over the coming 10 days or so is probably Danjuma. I think that's the big question, really. That's the one where we're really going to have to keep our eyes on and see how that unfolds.
Comes to Danjuma in a moment. Just had a couple of questions because obviously we're live on YouTube and on Facebook. And Leafy Outlook Design on YouTube has said it is not only the risk of losing Doucoure, but the risk that we will not replace him with a player that fits in Dyche's plan and style of play. I think we've addressed that, haven't we? That's the big risk, isn't it?
This team has one way of playing, and it only works with. Yeah, there are a handful of players that prop it up, and Doucoure is one of the most important. He kind of almost has two roles within that midfield, doesn't he? Because his energy is just so boundless, the way he covers ground, and the goals that he's scored. I mean, he's emerged as probably an unlikely hero, but I don't think that his importance outside can be understated. And I don't think it's almost so unusual the role that he fills within that Everton side. I don't think it could be replicated.
Yeah, I mean that type of player is unusual. Full stop. Not only with Everton, but those type of players who are not a midfielder, but they're not a striker, and are therefore very difficult to pick up and play against. They don't grow on trees, do they?
No.
And you're not going to be able to go to a shelf and pick one off. Consequently, so from Everton's perspective, definitely can't lose him for what he's done so far, and also because there's very few players like that in the market anyway, even if we did have the money, to be fair.
Sam Stanley, I should say, has also been commenting on YouTube, and he's saying, struggling to find a way out of this mess. We either sell our best players and get weaker on the pitch, or we keep them, which leaves us on the brink of bankruptcy. Hopefully, it never goes that far, but it's just a bit of a mess, isn't it? Really, that there's so many issues, obviously, with the appeal against the points deduction, the second charge. Not really having a proper board at the moment. The takeover. It just does feel like at some stage, Gav, that unless this takeover comes through and there is an influx of cash into the business, that eventually, even if it's not January, good players will have to leave.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, it depends. If you think about it, if we did get taken over, and there's a possibility that actually in the summer, because we lose, I don't talk about profit and sustainability, but we lose all the COVID years this year, so we're on 3 years rolling, 3 years since COVID. So there's a possibility that we may be in better shape, but what doesn't help is we don't really know what, boring here again, aren't I? The 22-23 accounts look like. No. So it may be actually that, once all that's played through, and once you look at this year, that actually we may be in a better shape in the summer. And Joe, you've spoken before about these people come up the wage bill and stuff like that. So it may be in the summer, if we have been taken over, that may not be the case. But we don't know that because we don't know what last year's accounts do. But I think the thrust of the question is right, isn't it? The number of movable parts here in terms of our decision making is infinite, isn't it? Really, and we've just spoken about that for 20 minutes, haven't we? From the playing side, from the financial side, from the profits and sustainability, and the cash side of the business, which are two completely different things. The board issue, the takeover issue. There's so many things that go into a decision here about selling a player. It's no longer, and it hasn't been for a while, has it? Really, it's no longer been. Is it a footballing decision? The footballing decision here is to sell this player or not. That those days have long gone with Everton, and that's been the case for 2 or 3 years now. And it's right. But ultimately, any decision being taken can't harm the future of the club as a going concern business-wise, can it? Really? And I think there will maybe some decisions that need to be taken before the end of the window where we've got to keep the club going as a going concern. We may have to take. I think the Onana one's an interesting one. The Onana one's a classic one. It doesn't make sense from a profit sustainability issue because of the way that works. But from a cash side of the issue, if somebody could give us 70 million quid as a business, you'd have that. And that's an interesting one. There's also the more worrying thing here isn't it? And I know this will be whatever it's left to the transfer window finishes is clubs that know all this, isn't it? And we end up selling one of our assets for less than their market value because clubs know we need the cash.
Well, that's it.
And then that's where we are in a vulnerable position as well. That's worrying.
I think we're in a situation now where, barring serious injury, it's pretty clear that Amadou Onana and Jarrad Branthwaite are on really positive trajectories. there are lots of clubs that may like them now that know that they will want them in the future. And if they know that they'll want them in the future, and they see that Everton are particularly vulnerable right now, it makes sense that now's the time to go for them, because there is and there are huge question marks over 777 as well. I'm not even saying that's necessarily the best outcome in this, but there is perhaps with all the different ways in which this can unfold. One of them is that Everton end up actually in a relatively stable position in the summer, and that might then mean that all of a sudden they can hold they can hold out for market value for someone like Branthwaite and Onana, and then all of a sudden, if Arsenal or Newcastle, someone wants to come in for either of them, Everton can say, well, we're not going to budge unless it's 100 million. Whereas now, and again, we don't know the situation because we don't know the last set of accounts that went to the Premier League and the result of the second charge, but those are the. Right now, obviously, Everton could be in a far more vulnerable position, and therefore couldn't hold out for anywhere near as much money, depending on what those accounts show. And I think that's another one of the moving parts. One of the other moving parts is we don't, because of the way in which the case has been handled by the Premier League, we can't really second guess how they're interpreting the second accounts. Like I don't know everything from where. The listener kind of makes a good point. I kind of wrote about this at the weekend. I think from our perspective, from the outside looking in, it feels like, look, Everton are in this situation. It's their own fault. Like, Everton are responsible for being in this situation. I'm not saying the Premier League have handled this case well, but Everton are in a position where they're being prosecuted and punished through their own mistakes and poor forward planning and irresponsible spending. But once they've got into trouble, it looks like they've done everything right to get out of it. They've sold some of their best players. They've operated far more cautiously in the transfer market. They've slashed the wage bill. It's still too high, but they've got rid of. They've taken every opportunity they can to get rid of some of a lot of earners. They're building a new stadium to try and create better revenues to put them in a stronger financial position. And one of the things I'm really interested with the second charge is it a technical charge because they've breached the rules again, but actually there was just no leeway. The damage was done in the earlier 2 years that have already been dealt with was so bad that Everton were actually never going to be able to get out of it, in which case there's a double jeopardy, and it's like, well, what else could Everton do? And therefore punishing them twice severely would feel hard done by. And we have to acknowledge there's a potential for this. Is there a scenario where in the latest set of accounts there's spending that we don't, or losses that we just don't know about and are far less easier to excuse? Or have they, for instance, again, I think this is a really big issue. I'd love to know what the conversations were between the Premier League and the club, or what the different sides' interpretations of where Everton were at that stage was in the summer of Frank Lampard, because it's very clear from the last panel, although this wasn't under the scope of the case, the Premier League still brought it up. It's very, very clear that the Premier League had a dim view of Everton's transfer business in the summer of Frank Lampard and the outlay that was spent. And it would be very interesting to know why they hold it so, and how severe that could be for the independent panel's judgment on Everton's second alleged breach.
Let's stay on the appeal and the second charge. We'll just mention another question or just comment on YouTube from Bobby saying, I don't agree with selling Branthwaite. I'd like to see him for another year.
We know that.
Love to see the next 10 years. Kind of my feeling is if one was to go more imminently, it feels like more Onana.
I think so.
I think there's a ceiling bigger for Branthwaite in terms of price, because I hate to be cynical and and horrible about this, because what I've seen enough of him now for 6 months, I think most of us agree he's probably going to the very top.
Yeah.
Do you think there's, in terms of price wise, because as good as Onana is, are there fewer players like Branthwaite available? A left-sided centre-back who, judging by his performance at left-back against Fulham, is equally as adept on his left foot, even though he's actually right-footed, English as well. It feels like, I know financial concerns may bring it forward if someone came in and bid in the next 10 days, but it feels like this would be the wrong time to sell for Branthwaite. Surely his value is going to go even higher in the months to come and years to come.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's no good time to sell Branthwaite. I mean, the ideal scenario, I think the dream scenario is that he's leading out a competitive Everton side as captain for the first game in the new stadium. That was what we'd love to see.
That'd be nice to see. Just one thing about Onana. Would he want to go to Newcastle, or would he reject on the basis that, in terms of the jump, what he wants to his next club, and he's talked about moving on and playing better players and stuff? Is Newcastle that big a jump? Isn't he just going from one club who's got profit and sustainability issues to another club who's got profit and sustainability issues? In other words, would he only go personally to a big six club or a top club on the continent? Is Newcastle that big a jump to justify?
Well, it's a smaller club than Everton, isn't it?
Yeah, well, well, that's a separate conversation. But yeah, you know what I mean. Forgetting we've spoken about we felt what the players wanted, and he might just want to say, well, actually, the main music is that, but we know what goes on behind the scene, don't we? That I can go to a bigger club in the summer, so that's what I may want to stay to that. Again,
you imagine it'll be how bad Everton's finances are. We'll have a big say in all that, wouldn't they? So. Yeah.
But they can't force them to move, can they? Can they? Can they if they want to? Not sure.
I suppose they can't force them to sign a contract.
Yeah. I don't know. It's an testimony on Arnaut.
Feel like a manager after a defeat because I want to stress some positives here. But Gav, you've seen a lot of good centre backs in your day at Everton.
Yeah.
Again, it's still early days. It's still only 6 months into his career. But for Branthwaite, in terms of young prospects coming through, how highly do you rate him?
I've not seen enough of him really. I've only seen obviously his time in COVID. He played in it a couple of times. I did like him when he first played, and I saw Terry Butcher's debut for Ipswich at Goodison in 1978, and I likened him to a young Terry Butcher in terms of his gait, in terms of his overall look and on the pitch and stuff. And I still go by that. I still think I'll draw with the Terry Butcher comparisons, and Terry was a great centre half, played for England, captain England, the World Cup semi-final. He does remind him of him a bit, but he's got a bit more pace than Butcher. He's right up there, isn't he? I mean, the obvious comparison is Stones, isn't it? Even though they're two different players, I think it was quite obvious when Stones was playing at Everton. He's probably wasted the centre half. He was probably a midfielder, wasn't he? Really, I don't think he could say that about Branthwaite. At the same time, I think Branthwaite is a far more powerful and dominating presence at centre back than what Stones is, and that's quite obvious now, isn't it? Stones is the obvious comparison, and but the two, I look at them as two different players. But in terms of being a 21, whatever he is, old centre half at Everton, he'd be up there from what I've seen, but I've not seen enough. He certainly had plenty of practice playing centre half at Everton, as you would say. So, and it's been good. And the thing is, I think I said this in the summer when he came, there's that stat, isn't it, that the average striker in Holland is a stone lighter than the striker in England. And so you used to more, when you see Dutch strikers and play over there, it's more technical, isn't it? More technical game. What I was concerned about was that coming to England, there's a technical striker, but there's a lot more physical strikers, isn't there? How he would sort of approach that, and he hasn't been found wanting. In fact, for most of the time, he's appeared stronger than the centre forward he's playing against. How many centre forwards is he left lying on a heap, or have just not bothered to challenge him? I'm thinking Antonio at West Ham there. I think he just gave up, didn't he? So right at the top, but not seeing enough. And other clubs will be wary of that when they start making bids, by the way. He's not played for England, has he? So there's a lot of money to talk about for somebody who's not played Champions League, not played for England. So Stones had played for England for a couple of years, hadn't he, when he went? So it'd just be interesting to see how that plays out. But in answer to the question, right near the top, I think. But there's more work to be done there. But he's got a good manager, hasn't he? He knows centre half game inside out, and that would be, that certainly helps him. Also by the fact that I think Tarkovsky is good for him, and I think also as well, as you said, I think him and Mikalenko bounce off each other. And I throw to Mitch McNeil there. I think it's a good strong left side we've got when McNeil play. That's why we miss when McNeil plays. We miss him as much from the defensive side of it than the attacking side of it. you have like you've got three players on the left-hand side of the team who all gel and are all good to one another. That's enormous benefit, and we've had that, and I think Branthwaite benefits from that as well.
Absolutely. We've got a couple more questions to get through, three more, but I'll read two out there because they're kind of like on the similar subject. D. Hagan on Facebook has asked, does anyone understand yet where this second FFP charge has come from? I know you kind of touched on it, but that's the first question. And then Peter Collins on YouTube has said, with the second breach of PSR and a rumoured third breach, obviously Everton could again be impacted next season. Peter's asking, could this impact our appeal regarding the original breach, or are they separate entities?
Well, the appeal comes first, and I think it's fair to say that, certainly from a club perspective, that the appeal will play a defining role in the second allegation and the way that's handled. The reason being that the club think that there is still elements of how things are calculated that are up for grabs and in dispute. So obviously when they go to the appeal, which I think is going to be very soon, I think we'll hear get a verdict on. I'd be surprised if we don't get one in February. Everton aren't going in there arguing that their innocence. They've accepted that there's a breach. The question really for the appeal is a little bit over calculations and how certain things were worked out. So to define the extent of the breach and then also the main thing is the mitigating circumstances. That's their argument is going into that, saying the original panel didn't take into enough account the mitigating circumstances and therefore the punishment was too harsh. Talking about things like COVID and Russian invasion of Ukraine and things like that, that the club are saying these are unforeseen circumstances that have hit us in a way that couldn't have been anticipated and we couldn't necessarily have mitigated for. So obviously depending on if this new appeal, if the panel in the appeal show some leeway on that, then I think that the same issues are going to come up in the second case. And if Everton make headway in the first case, their defence will be far stronger in the second one. But where that would leave the second one, I don't know, because I think from a club narrative, there's a belief that they might be able to almost they might be able to get enough success in the appeal to severely undermine the allegation against him in the second one. Because their position is that although they've confirmed that they're in breach for a second time to the Premier League, it's not an admission of guilt because they dispute some of the way the figures are worked out. And I think their position is if they can win the battle over how some of these things are worked out, they've already lost that battle the first time around, but if they can win it in the appeal, then there'll be different calculations for the second breach, and therefore the breach might not be as bad or maybe not be. But the reality is we don't know the numbers. We don't know what's in the 22-23 accounts. So we like I say, when we look at, I think there was a degree of surprise over the fact that Everton were deemed to be in breach again. I was surprised. I've been writing since the points deduction that there was a chance of this, because when you look at the case notes, the Premier League go out of their way to say that to be critical of Everton spending under Frank Lampard, which wasn't under the scope of the first case, but is under the case of the second one. Now, they ain't going to be making that argument if they don't, if there isn't some weight behind it, some conversations or some fear over the numbers. So it was always a possibility. But even then, when you look at the business that's done, obviously the likes of Anthony Gordon being sold and the wages that went off the bill and the way in which the incomings are booked and the way in which the outgoings are booked, still a little bit surprised to see them breach. But again, we can't say, look, we said a lot last year, as a lot of the fan base did. This is clearly a club that hasn't been run particularly well. So all of a sudden they can't go making promises that there aren't things in the next set of accounts that aren't going to make us recoil when it finally comes out and perhaps weaken the club's case and strengthen and give us a greater understanding as to why the Premier League have charged for a second time. But like I said earlier, again, there's that big unknown, which we don't really know how the Premier League are interpreting. The idea of being able to breach consecutive years is a slightly strange one, because you'd think that they might be able to put a cap on it and then go, well, we're not going to punish you twice for the same thing. So it's if the second breach was unavoidable because of the extent of the first breach and they've already been punished for that first breach severely, which we know they have, then you start to ask questions about the second
Yeah.
prosecution. But it's an unknown.
We don't know, do we?
Don't know.
What we do know, worth pointing out here, and this will, I would imagine, come out when the judgment's in the second commission. Is this not the second time we breached? It's the third time we breached, because we breached in 2021 and the Premier League let us off, and that was in the commission, and we were effectively given a suspended sentence. And I've said all along here, I think the August 21 agreement between the Premier League and Everton is key to all this, because we were let off and we were told, but what you can't do is breach in 21-22 or 22-23, and it would appear we breached in 2, and so both those years. And the commission will certainly, the last commission didn't look on that in a great light, and a future commission would do the same.
That's the worry, isn't it?
Yeah,
because they get let off the first time, the second one gets dealt with more harshly because of it, and then when you look at what the Premier League's, and it's only the Premier League's opinion, not we don't an independent one yet. When you look at what the Premier League was saying about the summer of 23 spending, it's exactly. You were warned, we let you off. You were warned, we punish you. You were warned, you carried on doing the same thing. There is potential that is part of the equation.
It's like being given a suspended sentence in a court. Something I must point out I've never been given. And then you go out and commit two other offences shortly after, isn't it? Really, you're not going to be looked at in a great light, and I think that's something that we need to bear in mind. The other thing is, I am surprised, to be honest with you. And I said before on the podcast, and said that last Monday, and the reason being is, and I don't want to again bore everybody on this, it's like a 3-year rolling thing. Well, that 120 million losses that the Premier League said we had, well, about 80 million of those was in 2018-19. So that's disappeared from the books now. So for us to have effectively breached again, we probably made losses after all the adjustments and stuff like that of £80 million again last year. And I can't really see, when you see the movement we've done in terms of player sales, so where that's come from. I think one of the things there's a couple of things I've played into it is we haven't got the USM money. Contrary to popular belief, the USM money was always counted in the last commission. That the USM money's gone. We're probably, as we've just said at the start of the podcast, loaned up to the hilt. So we're probably playing a lot more in interest rates. There's obviously, we've had to pay. I've lost track of managers now. It was Lampard we've paid off last year, and also as well as several people have pointed out, is the directors left in June, and there was a settlement there, as we spoke about, I think, before we came on, and so there's bits there, but it's a hell of a lot of money. It must be a hell of a lot of money that is still in there that we don't know about, and that's the concern for me. And I think the underpinning that is the Commission's point that the club knew that to a degree. They knew the USM funding was gone, but they still went out and spent £80 million on players in the summer of 22, and that's going to be a thing that the Commission will point out, which you've already hinted at, hasn't in the previous in the previous hearing. So I was surprised, but we just don't know, do we, till it comes out. But all this doesn't help, does it? We're talking about a business trying to operate effectively. It's not helping us to operate effectively, and not necessarily all of it's down to us. Some of it is around the governance of this issue, isn't it? Really. Yeah.
So all the problems Everton have got, and we've listed quite a few today. Obviously, at the top of the not to-do list, or is it almost like a domino effect? It's the appeal, isn't it, Joe? And we've had Lisa Billington on Facebook. Pretty straightforward question: when will we hear against the appeal? When will we hear the appeal?
Yeah, Richard Master said the appeal was going to be heard shortly when he appeared before the select committee last week, and there's clearly Everton made clear they're going to appeal from the minute that the punishment became clear, and that was obviously November, so that was 2 months ago now that we're looking at. So they've had a lot of time to prepare for something that they knew was coming, and the Premier League would have been alive to the fact that the new profit and sustainability framework time frame was going to be a factor this season, where the accounts were in by the end of last year, and then going to be assessed in the first fortnight with the intention that any breached or alleged breaches would be dealt with before the end of the season. So you would think that it would be happening as soon as possible. I think it's going to happen, probably this month. I don't know at what point a verdict's made. I don't know if a panel comes away from the hearing and then takes a little bit of time to deliberate, which sometimes happens. But I think there's a belief within the club that they'll know the situation by the end of February. And I think, to be honest, I think internally the decisions will have been made and verdicts would have been reached, within the next week or two, and we'll probably find out in February at some point.
Well, for not just
or within the next few weeks. Sorry.
Yeah.
For not just Everton's sake, really, for the integrity of the Premier League, this needs to get sorted, doesn't it, Gav? You were talking earlier about the effect it could have had on Everton's transfer business, but we've got to remember there's 5 or 6 clubs down there who are probably waiting to see if Everton get any points back, and then obviously if Everton do get points back, they may look at Nottingham Forest and think, well, again, we don't know their figures, but potentially their punishment won't be as harsh as Everton's first time round. It just needs to get sorted, this, doesn't it?
My learner's friends pointed this out very early on in the process, that the clubs affected this at the bottom of the table, that their January plans are affected, aren't they, a lot, and probably affected even more now, not just because of Everton, but because of Nottingham Forest as well, isn't it? Everton were not on the Forest weren't on the agenda at the start of January, were they? Yeah, and the whole thing needs to be sorted as soon as possible. This twice in a season thing just hasn't worked, has it really? In some way, it may have been, in retrospect, a better idea was just to, if they're going to do twice in a season, is just to roll the whole thing up into 4 years and just do the whole, thing at once. To be honest with you, so we get done. When we get done, it's probably wrong. We get considered over rather than 3-year cycle. All the clubs get considered over a 4-year cycle. So that would remove the double jeopardy and all that type of stuff. You just get judged on the 4 years, and one hearing may have been a better idea. But clubs didn't. It's this in the club's gift. People talk. I said this last week. These rules are voted for by the clubs. This second set of accounts, that was the clubs wanted that because they didn't want, like it's happened with us this season, being judged for something that happened 18 months, 2 years before. So it's clubs should, it's in their gift. But the one thing is, and goes back to the original rules and the sustainability rules in 2013, is the rules that look okay on paper, it's the application of the rules that hasn't worked, hasn't it? No, but they obviously didn't foresee somebody breaching it in consecutive years. But as you said, Joe, is if you breach it in 1 year, the chances are you're going to breach again. And they just never thought that through. And I think though people have moaned about the rules, and quite rightly, and I commented on them, it's the application. I don't really get that. It's the application of the rules that hasn't worked for me. And they could have done more to make that clearer and fairer. And I don't think that's been the case. So you have got this double jeopardy stuff going on, which I don't think this muddies even the muddiest of horses have been muddied even further by that, haven't they?
Definitely. Just one final question, because we're coming up to, I think, to the 55-minute mark of the podcast. We've had a lot of people watching, a lot of people's questions. Hopefully we've got through them all. Just because I said we'd mention it, it's a question for both of you. Arnaut Danjuma, you said that's going to be probably the hot topic of the last 10 days of the transfer window. I've got to be honest, I thought it spoke volumes that he didn't start against Palace, they didn't come on. Dobbin came on before him, even though Dobbin did well. Do you think, Joe, even maybe before Saturday, we may have seen the last of Arnaut Danjuma? And to you, Gav, are you okay with that? Or, would you prefer him to stay?
Everton have the final say. So Everton, for the terms of their loan deal with Villarreal, they do hold the cards here. And they publicly they want to keep him. Obviously, Arnaut Danjuma wants to play football as much as he can. And my understanding is that he's happy at it. He'd like to stay if he can get the minutes that he thinks he deserves. But obviously, he's worried that he's not going to get them. And that worry is he's got good evidence for that because he hardly played in the first part of the season. So really, I think you've got a scenario there where there's a player that wants to be shown that he's wanted. And with that being the case, I mean, you also have a scenario where Everton can't afford to lose him, really. I mean, they just don't have a big enough squad to be able to, especially if, it fits in with the Doucoure thing. If Doucoure was to go, if there was to be a scenario that unfolded where Everton can keep hold of him, well, then the most obvious solution is to perhaps move Harrison inside, in which case you only have a senior winger at the club or senior player at the club who has a history of playing on the wing is Danjuma. So. But clearly there's a disconnect between the position of the club and Dyche's actions. I think it's fair to say, because how easy would it have been to start Danjuma against Palace in the replay? I don't really understand the decision. There may be good reason for it. Look, I mean, Dyche has got a big A on his report card at the minute for the last 12 months. I don't think any manager could have done as well as he could have done in the circumstances that he's had with Everton. So I'm not going to sit here and, put a black mark against his name. But, I mean, Danjuma started 2 games in a row. He played well against Crystal Palace in the first game. Against Aston Villa, he did all right. Aston Villa's offside trap is famed across Europe at the minute, and he sprung it.
Yeah.
He beat the offside trap to play in Dominic Calvert-Lewin. It's not his fault that Calvert-Lewin then missed. He could have had an assist against one of the best defences in world football at the moment there. And his replacement is a lad who, thankfully, McNeil. I don't think there is much argument from Danjuma that McNeil and Harris have been starting in front of him because the results have been obvious and their roles in that have been obvious. But obviously, McNeil had just come off a stretcher 10 days earlier and didn't look 100% fit. And as a player that, given his value for Everton, you want to protect and make sure he gets back to full fitness. It would have been such an easy decision, I think, and a statement of intent to perhaps reassure the player in his camp that Everton believed he was of value to him by just starting him in that game. In fact, they didn't even bring him on. That just perhaps suggests to me that this is a scenario that hasn't played out to its fullest yet. Obviously, we know Leon are circling. We know there are opportunities for him elsewhere. What it probably falls on Everton to do is either line up a replacement for him and do that deal first. If they don't, I think it's in the club's interest to keep hold of him. But if they were to keep hold of him but beyond the transfer window, but not play him when there are obvious opportunities to, I don't know how that situation continues. And obviously, we have had evidence of this backfire on Everton already this season with Damari Gray, where it was clear that come the end of the summer transfer window, there was a belief that he could be reintegrated into a squad which he hadn't been much of a part of over the summer. Then they sold Alex Iwobi. Then the public words were there was a place for Gray, and he responded to that by taking to social media, and a couple of days later he's off to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Final word, Gav.
On Danjuma?
Yeah.
The complete opposite to Corey, isn't it? Which is, you only sell him on a business decision. Danjuma's all football, isn't it, really? There's no business with Danjuma in terms of the impact on the club financially. Yeah, he's a bum on a seat or on the subs bench, or he's on the pitch. So I'd keep him. I was surprised he didn't play against Palace, purely because I was surprised to see McNeil on the pitch, to be honest with you.
And it's good that we're all over them. McNeil's importance is probably only second to Doucoure, but
I know it was probably,
last 12 months.
I suppose McNeil, because it was a free week, maybe. If he'd had a week game at the weekend, maybe he wouldn't have played McNeil. But I do think Danjuma's being underutilised from what I've seen. I think he's given us something. He's inconsistent, and I don't think he, when he's on goal or he's got a chance, I don't think looking up to see if there's a team in his best position as part of his psyche. But I think he's been okay, and he'd be well worth keeping, because 7 days from the end of the transfer window, I'm not sure. 8 days, whatever it is, there's many other options out there. And yeah, I think Joe's right. There's a bit of a grey area with Dyche and Danjuma, isn't it, really? I think sometimes I'm not sure on Dyche's decision making, and I certainly think did he play him against Fulham in the
in brought him on, didn't he?
Yeah.
He brought him on in the Carabao Cup.
Yeah. Well, that was a one-off game at home.
Yeah.
You've got to win, haven't you, really? I was surprised he didn't use him. I think I said that at the time. Yeah, I'd keep him. I'd be disappointed to see him go, to be fair, because this is a football decision, not a business decision, and it just leaves us a problem, doesn't it, that we may not have time to resolve.
Definitely. Well, Joe, Gav, thank you very much for joining us on today's podcast. Thanks for everyone who's been watching live on YouTube and Facebook, and obviously we'll listen on the podcast once it's uploaded and once you've heard it. Gratefully appreciated you listening and watching today. The guys will be back later this week as we look ahead to that FA Cup game with Luton Town. Who knows? I'm sure we'll be up to date with any off-the-field developments, including the future of Arnaut Danjuma. Thanks very much.